I went back and I watched the Grudens QB camp appearance from Johnny Manziel a couple years ago. Leading up to the NFL draft, he went to talk to John Gruden in the FFCA, the Fired Footballers Coaches Association down in Florida. And, I watched only, a couple clips of the episode. I didn't have the heart to watch the whole hour, but I would imagine that based on what I saw and the clips I pulled out of it, I would imagine this entire episode is a goldmine of hollow quotes from Johnny Manziel talking about all the work he's putting in, how serious he is. And I want to give you 3 clips today. If you're watching on YouTube, I can't show you the video. That would be, I don't even know if I think the audio is going to be allowed and not copyright struck by ESPN. I think we can play the audio, not the video, but I want to play the audio clip here. This is John Gruden asking Johnny Manziel about his off-the-field stuff, if he's going to be a problem for a team that drafts him. Take a listen.
Is there a lot of maintenance, Johnny?
No, sir.
Off the field? I mean, if I draft you in the first round, all this stuff here, what is this? What am I getting?
My mom always tells me there's a time and a place for everything, and during the spring, during after the Heisman, when things happen so fast, I did too much, and I put too much on my own plate and didn't say no enough, and should have said no more.
Man, isn't that wild? It's disappointing, really. I think Johnny might even at the time have believed what he's saying. I don't know. He could be lying his tail off, trying to save face and become a first-round pick, but it's very obvious now, watching the ESPN, the Netflix documentary, watching all of the things that went down in his personal life. Johnny had severe addiction issues, and we now know leading up to the draft, he kept falling off the wagon. His agent's going crazy, like trying to just keep this guy and get him to the finish line. Agent's all worried he's going to fail a drug test. And Johnny was either lying his butt off or could acknowledge what was wrong with him and was unable to change. And at this point in his career, right, he's heading into the NFL, getting ready for the draft, saying whatever he needs to say to put out a good public image. And none of that's good. No matter what the possibilities are here, whether he's lying or telling the truth and just can't change. It's not because we know he was still kept having trouble and couldn't stay, pass a drug test and was doing all this stuff, and the agent's freaking out. And for him to either he believes it and just couldn't change again, or he's lying. And that quote, I should have said no more. What's sad about that is he's aware of it. He's able to say, like, hey, this isn't good. Does he believe it or not? I don't know. But there's a lot going on in that quote, man. It's not only eye-opening, it's a bit disturbing where you're like, man, this is a kid who just couldn't get out of his own way. And I maintain that it's very, very sad. The whole Johnny Manziel storyline, how much money he made for college football and Texas A&M, the way that everyone was kind of complicit and just ignoring it and not really helping the guy who seemed like he was kind of going off the rails and almost encouraging his behavior. It's not great. And I imagine that position, if you're Johnny Manziel, getting grilled by John Gruden across the table from you, you got to lie your tail. If you're trying to keep it together, you can't let anyone know your dark secret that really you're partying like crazy, doing drugs, going insane off the field. If you're a mess behind the scenes, then and you feel like you have to hide it. I mean, that's why when I walked away from Strong Opinion Sports for a while, I did HVAC. I really worked on myself. I went on a walkabout, did a road trip. I was a disaster. I called off my engagement. I was not doing well mentally or emotionally, and I knew I had to take a break and get away. I couldn't keep doing what I was doing. And that Johnny Manziel never had the time or the ability to walk away and take a break and work on himself. Like, what if after his second year in college, he had said, I got an addiction problem, I got to walk away? Like, first of all, you can't admit that, right? You can't take 2 years off of college football to solve your own personal stuff. You're going to miss your window as an athlete. NFL teams will never take you seriously. It's a disaster. So it's not a realistic goal or option for him to say, hey, I gotta work on myself. I gotta go get therapy and go to addiction stuff and try to become a better person, because I don't think if the way my life is headed, I'm not going to work as a quarterback. That's not a realistic option for him. And what he really needed to do is go to the NFL, make as much money as humanly possible to maximize his potential before it all fell apart. And I think you can see that from Johnny Manziel. He's a guy just barely keeping it together, not doing well. As a guy who myself has not done well in the past, I can really understand that. And it all happened so fast for Johnny Manziel. Like, he won the Heisman Trophy his first year as a starting quarterback. He's a sophomore in college, becomes this megastar. No one really knew how to handle that. Like, he had to take online classes. He's getting mobbed everywhere. He's getting pictures taken of him. He's like on TMZ and ESPN every day. And I've talked about the Chick-fil-A Bowl where he was drinking Fireball at halftime. That's someone who was in that locker room told me that. I believe that, absolutely. And there's clips of him in this Gruden's QB camp talking to John Gruden, where Gruden asks him, like, tell me about this Chick-fil-A Bowl, because they had a big comeback in the second half. And he's like, my teammates were just sheep. They needed someone to lead them. And you see video of him, like, yelling at his teammates on the sideline. And you're like, I bet his teammates hated him. He's a hypocrite. He's the most unprepared frat boy of college football, telling them they need a leader. Like, I can only imagine what his teammates thought of him at Texas A&M. And we know that his teammates in Cleveland on the Browns didn't really like him. And I think there's a big question mark. Like, why, when you watch that Netflix documentary of Johnny Manziel, why were none of his teammates in that documentary? I think it's because they all hate him. They got nothing good to say. They don't even want to participate. It's really fascinating to me. And so I want to play clip number 2 here, because I really want to say this. I think the Netflix documentary is actually kind of shallow. I don't think it went as far as I wanted, and it was surface level. It talked about a lot of stuff we already knew, and I feel like they could have asked even tougher questions and really pushed Johnny a little bit. They didn't. I just wanted more time. I wanted more from that story. One episode, an hour of Johnny Manziel's story, it's not enough. And I think you could do a whole docu-series where you really dive into what happened to Johnny, let him profit off it, make some money doing it. But you really need like The Last Dance type of like an episodic docu-series about Johnny Manziel to really tell that story, because there's so much more left on the table from that untold documentary on Netflix. It drives me nuts. So anyway, here's clip number 2.
Went through high school and played 3 years and never won a state championship. To 2 years of being at A&M and never won a national championship. Tired of not winning a championship. And I consider myself a winner, and I hate losing. And yeah, I've had a decent record, but it's not up to par. It's not up to where I want it to be. It's just not acceptable with me. It doesn't sit well with me. Losing games is not something that sits well and that I can sleep well at night knowing that we went out and got our
It's so funny to hear Johnny Manziel say he's tired of not winning a championship, because what he's insinuating here is that he's going to go to the NFL and try to win a Super Bowl. And I will always believe that part of why Johnny Manziel left college early, he left after only 2 years as a starter. I'm going to the NFL. I'm trying to take my game to the next level, is what he tells John Gruden later on in the show. And I think what happened was I don't think he could do 2 more years at Texas A&M. I don't think he could keep it together for 2 more football seasons. He wasn't ready as a quarterback. He was a very average athlete, ran like a 4.7. He's 5'0". Who knows what his grades were like? I think Johnny Manziel knew, like, if I'm ever going to make the amount of money I need to in the NFL, I got to go now. I'm viewed as a first-round pick. I got to go now. I got to leave now. Because I don't think he could keep it together for more years in college football, to behave well enough, to have good enough grades, to not get in trouble somewhere. He already had the NCAA breathing down his neck. And really what I believe about Johnny Manziel, his career was built like a Jenga tower. And he's just hoping that if I pull this block, it's not going to knock everything down. It was tenuous. It was barely staying afloat. And Johnny had to cash in while he could. But to hear him talk about winning a title when he's not watching any film is insane. Like that, when I covered Johnny Manziel, I did that whole episode about the documentary. I barely talked about the film thing. To have no preparation and just be partying, and then talk about a title, talk about trying to lead your teammates, that's absurd. No one's going to respect that approach. And I always have wondered if partying was kind of a coping method for Johnny Manziel, because I think the fame got to be too much for him. And he was a kid, man. His brain was still developing. Johnny reminds me of like a Disney Channel child star who has all this fame and attention early on before their brain's fully developed, and they got to navigate all of this attention, and it's very hard. Like, attention can really mess with your brain. And I encourage you, look up the name Angus Jones. He was the kid on How I Met Your... No, not How I Met Your... What's that show with Charlie Sheen? Two and a Half Men. He was a kid on Two and a Half Men. Men. I never watched the show, but I saw that. I know the intro, and how do I say this? I want to be very careful with my words here. I lived in LA briefly. I worked on a movie, and my boss was a director. And the guy, he was my boss for lack of a better term. I just followed him around with the camera, did the best I could. And he was dating Angus Jones' mom. And Angus Jones had a hard life, man. Like, I encourage you, go look up current pictures of Angus Jones. Compare that to what he looked like on the TV show. I think the pictures speak for themselves. I don't want to, leave any personal information out there. I don't want to get myself in trouble somehow. But my point is that I've been around and seen the impact of being a child star can have on a person. And it's hard. When you get that much attention and that much money, fame, attention, money, when you're young and still a kid and not quite developed as a human, it can be really tough. And I think we saw that exactly happen to Johnny Manziel. He's a guy who I don't think was prepared at all for the position he was put in at all. So I want to play clip number 3. Johnny's sad, man. It's a really sad story, and it's not a shock he's not doing anything. I think Johnny's still in the middle of a really tough, depressive episode, and I don't think he's at all over what happened to him. So anyway, here's clip number 3. Take a listen.
Everybody's going to want you to be doing commercials, going to functions. Everybody's going to want to meet Johnny Manziel.
Football comes first.
Yeah.
Football is more important and trumps anything, any endorsement, any appearance, anything like that. Football and my teammates, those guys are my focus. Those guys, that's what I care about. I don't care about being in the public, being on the internet. That's not who I am. I never got that attention from when I was growing up. I don't need that attention now.
I'm not trying to attack Johnny Manziel, but it is comical. He cuts him off and says, football comes first. And it's like, those are such hollow words. You're saying the right thing. I understand. And from a PR perspective, you're doing exactly what you got to do to become a first-round pick. But that's just not true about him. Football comes first. No, there's so many other things you're putting before football. And the audacity to say that, and I don't think it's audacious. I think it's a guy, again, I said Johnny's career was like a Jenga tower. He's barely holding it together, just trying to make sure if he pulls this block, it doesn't all fall down. And I think Johnny's just saying exactly the right things he needs to say to get the money he can and run. But, he went to Vegas before a game on a Sunday. On a Saturday before an NFL game, he went to Vegas hoping to fly to the NFL game on Sunday. What? That's insane. That's the exact, example of a guy who's reckless and probably really depressed. And when you're depressed and struggling, you don't care about the consequences of your actions. That's Johnny Manziel. That's what that story is. And so I just want to maintain there's so much more to the Johnny Manziel story we'll never know. But if you want an entertaining, go watch the Johnny Manziel Untold documentary on Netflix. And then after that, track down the episode and go watch the John Gruden's QB Camp episode with Johnny Manziel. It's great comedy because everything he's saying is just not true. You're like, this guy's lying his butt off, trying to put himself in the best position possible for the draft. And I encourage you, if you want to have a good 2 hours of your life, watch the Netflix documentary followed by the Gruden's QB Camp. It will be a wildly fun time, very entertaining, and very sad. If you're a sick, twisted person like me, that's a fun afternoon, but it's also really heartbreaking. And the story of a guy who just didn't get the support he needed from the people around him, and I would argue was let down by people who turned a blind eye at Texas A&M, just happy to profit off of him, happy to use him to get ahead in whatever they needed. And what Johnny needed as a person is not what Johnny needed as a football player. For Johnny's career, the best thing was to leave for the NFL after 2 years at Texas A&M, or I guess 3 years at A&M, but 2 years starting, go to the NFL, make as much money as possible being a first-round pick. And they talk about it in the Netflix documentary. If he had kept things a little more together, not gotten drunk on a golf course, he might have got drafted way earlier in the first round by Houston. I think they had the number 1 pick and drafted Jadeveon Clowney that year. That would have been way more money for Johnny. So Johnny could barely keep it together as it was, but he didn't need what he was given. Johnny Manziel, everyone was hush-hush. Everyone was quiet. They put the money he could make in his football career ahead of what he needed as a human being. What Johnny Manziel needed as a human being was to be sat down and say, kid, what's going on? You need therapy. You need to work on yourself. He might not have listened. But I don't know that anyone at A&M, his college, that was making millions and millions of dollars profiting off of what he was doing for them. I don't think anyone sat him down and said, hey, Johnny, we got to figure this out. This isn't working for you. I know it's working on the field and you're doing great, but you're a disaster as a human. And it's really sad. Like, that's why you got to have really good people around you that you trust to keep you grounded. And if you don't have an inner circle of people you trust that can say no to you, to tell you you're wrong, it's a big problem. Johnny didn't have that. Johnny had people who enabled him and let it go on and on and on and go too far until it lost control, and then Johnny would listen to nobody. And if you're a young person out there listening, remember, you got to have people in your life that can call you out. You got to have people that can keep you in check. You got to have people you trust that can say no to you. And I don't think Johnny had that. I don't think he had anyone pushing back against what he was doing. And that's how this happens. This is how a guy, Johnny Manziel, ends up with, I would imagine he's got some money because he lives in a fairly nice house in a nice part of Phoenix, Scottsdale, Arizona. But I just have a lot of questions how he's really doing. And I think people were able to push aside how he was really doing because they were happy with how he was doing on the football field, or they were happy with how much money he was making them, or this or that. And no one really stopped and said, how are you doing as a human being? Not a football player, but as a human being. And I think if you asked Johnny Manziel, the human being, how he was doing during all of that, the Heisman Trophy, everything, I mean, he might have told you he was doing good, but I really go back to, I think the partying and the drinking and the drugs, it was all him kind of trying to escape the pressure and this insane scenario he found himself in. And I don't know, man. I just go back to, you got to have people that can challenge you and make you grow as a person, because if you don't have people that can say no to you, it's a massive problem in your life.